your life, inshallah.
What about me? You teaching? No? Okay. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. So, inshallah, we continue with our reflection on the Tafhim. We wanted to review, try to finish off the surah today so we can continue on. So, Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. So we continue on. So kind of what we're doing right now is we are regrouping and we're trying to bring together from the things that we learned. I don't have my pointer with me. So basically when we study any surah, we want to look at the name of the surah. Somehow we'll have some relationship to some theme in the surah itself. It has some relationship. This surah, Surah Al-Alaq, has two names. And sometimes it happens that a surah may have more than one name. So as a system, we look at the name of the surah, the period of revelation, and then there's some background ideas. So in our case, we have some Aqidah lessons or some points in Iman. But there may be other points aside from Aqidah that are found in the surah. So as far as the background is concerned that we need, this is part of the problem that we encounter a lot of times with studying the Quran or Hadith. Many of us, we don't have the background knowledge that will decode or make clear or simplify for us, like what is it that we're looking at. Even a simple hadith sometimes, it may seem clear, but then if you take it outside of the background context, we can get confused, right? We can get confused on ayat of the Quran. So for instance, building a background, this is more kind of a contemporary type of idea, especially in education. When we talk about building a background here for the sake of studying the surah, history is extremely important. But what do we mean by history, right? For us, in our study of the Quran, we're thinking of a specific meaning of history. For instance, the stories of the prophets, right? And in the case here of biography, even though stories of the prophets are like biographies, but here we're specifically saying the seerah, or the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the issue of biography, I put it here, is attached also to this line is attaching it to the lives of the Sahaba, because they're biographies as well. This is important because the knowledge of the companions gives us insight into the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to the Quran itself. Also, we should have some understanding of Jahiliyyah, and if we want to be more sophisticated, what we mean by that is the history of the Arabs and other nations, like the Romans and the Persians and other nations that existed. And if we even want to be more sophisticated, people of the book, right? Because then now what's going to happen is you're going to see in that history what's the uniqueness of the Muslim community. And some of the ulama, especially in the Indian subcontinent, they get heavy into this part. Some of them get heavy into the people of the book and so on and so forth, as far as when you talk about the background knowledge. So the stories of the prophets, alayhimus salam, very important. This is, we said before that the Quran, it has different approaches of how it teaches. But one method here is that it uses stories, but it uses stories in a very specific way, right? And then the personas that come up, right? The personalities that come up in these stories. So we want to mention something more related to like tafsir and the sciences of the Quran, so on and so forth. So actually, seerah and hadith, they all come under the term of sunnah. So in a lot of ways, when we're talking about the biography, we're talking about one aspect of the sunnah, which is necessary to understand the Quran, and is the most simplest aspect of the sunnah that we can study. You get what I'm saying? Hadith becomes a little more complicated. But the seerah, or the life of the Prophet ﷺ, it gives us like a snapshot view of how to practice the deen, how to implement the Quran, right? In a very simple way. So, but it's one thing to look at it from the angle of facts. Well, in this time period, there was this battle. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he talked to the uncle of his wife Khadija. That's like factual. But when we start looking at it from the angle of clarifying the meaning and clarifying practice, it gives us a different insight. Here in this, nobody's going to debate. I personally feel, this is a personal feeling in position, but I feel that the Muslims in general, Sunni and Shi'i, got away from this. And so it's all now my hadith, your hadith, my understanding of Quran, your understanding of the Quran. You know, I justify this, you justify that. And it gets more and more intense, because it gets to the point where now they have involved the deen in their own political, sectarian warfare. And it comes into the masjid. And it comes into the masjid at the most vulnerable times, like, Yom al-Jum'ah, all of a sudden somebody comes in and wants to prove a point, and it becomes an issue of, sectarian violence, and then whatever else goes behind that. So the other issue is that, okay, when we start talking about the lives of the companions tell us, especially their sayings right here, their sayings can clarify the Quran for us, especially if they tell us, well, we were with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and this ayat was revealed during this time. And then they give us the background. Also, and also sometimes, Ibn Abbas will come and clarify the meaning of the ayat. So if you eliminate this, you eliminate a lot of understanding about the Quran. Between Sunni and Shi'i, the Sunnis will eliminate majority of the companions. They stick with Ali mostly, although they also are into Salman al-Farsi and Bilal. But then they say, well, what we call the companions are the family of the Prophet. So that's how they take their methodology. But if you eliminate this, just say you eliminate Uthman or whatever, the Mus'haf is, we call it Mus'haf Uthmani. It becomes a problem. So that's like kind of the backdrop issue. Okay. So when we talk about the Quran, and we mentioned this before, we mentioned about the order of the Quran, right? The Quranic order. Here, we're talking about something specific. We're talking about the idea of a surah, and then within the surah, an ayat. But the order of the Quran breaks down to surah and ayat, right? So when the surah consists of ayat, this is something very simple, but the framework is maybe sometimes we don't think about it. We want to bring that framework to our study of the Quran. So the surah, we look at them from the angle of the timing. When were they, in general, when they were revealed? And sometimes the surah, it could be, part of it can be revealed in Mecca, part of it can be revealed in Medina. But in any event, we're looking at whether it comes into the Mecca realm or the Medini realm. And that, allows us, this classification, it makes simple for us. It gives us a framework for the meaning, and it gives us an understanding of how to apply it, especially from a spiritual educational perspective. we fail sometimes in this angle. We're just reading Quran. We fail in this angle, but we fail to realize the importance of having a foundation in the Mekki sword of the Quran. From a spiritual perspective, from a perspective of understanding ourselves, understanding the world, understanding the nature of human civilization. You know, that the Mekki sword, they give us a deep understanding. And then the Madani sword, they build on that. They build on that, so to speak. As far as the ayat of the Quran, which make up the surah, some ayat will be clear and some ayat need to be clarified. Right? And so, for instance, if they need to be clarified, they have to go to this process of being clear before we get to this realm here, which is the realm of knowledge. Right? Before we can look at the ayat from the angle of what they teach us about belief or halal, haram, or moral lessons. And this kind of simplified. It's more than that, but it's simplified. So the hadith of Jibreel tells us that, you know, the deen is rooted around the knowledge of Iman, Islam, and Ihsan. And so the same thing, Aqidah comes back to Iman, halal, haram knowledge comes back to Islam. You know, the moral lessons or development or spiritual development, you know, it comes back to Ihsan. Any questions? Right. There's Hadith Jibreel. We say it like that. It gets its name because it's like they say, a so famous hadith. You know, it's very famous. So this hadith is like Surah Al-Fatiha. You know, Surah Al-Fatiha in the Quran is considered like the mother of the book. Well, Hadith Jibreel is considered the mother of the Sunnah. Right, the mother of the Sunnah. So there's other hadith like the hadith of intention and so on and so forth. But that hadith is noted because it gives us like a snapshot of the teachings of Islam in a simple way. Right? The beautiful thing about Islam is that Islam, Islam teaches at the level that everyone can understand. Right? And then within that context, you know, you have what they say tafawut, you have different degrees of knowledge. But it teaches in a way where everybody can understand. And so here, did you have a question? Did you have something to say or question? So the issue here, seerah is essential. Seerah, it means the life walk. So it's like you're walking with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam on that journey of prophethood, and even prior to. One of the things about the Tafhim of Maulana Maududi, there's a lesson that we get in applying seerah, right? And that's that, you know, for instance, he takes seerah and he's bringing it into Quran, and he's bringing it in a way which is showing us how the two things relate without getting too bogged down with a lot of ahadith. You get the idea or no? Okay. So usually Maududi in his tafsir, he'll bring a few ahadith, but a lot of times he's relating it to seerah. Seerah has different stages. Just like our lives. We have young, you know, when we're young, you know, when we're in that mid-age, and then when we start getting, you know, different lives. Lives when we begin our education, you know, different stages of life, so to speak. So he does that. He systematizes, well, this first stage in Mecca, second stage in Mecca, you know, fifth stage in Mecca, before Hijrah. And so it kind of helps you to visualize what's going on. You visualize what's going on. So you finally, because the way that Islam is studied, a lot of times it's studied like you have this branch of knowledge and that branch of knowledge, and then it becomes complicated. But the way he does it is he says, Quran's here, let's bring it right to the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and let's see how it is that we can understand it in a way so we can act upon Quran. We don't want to stay too long in an academic sense. Not that that's bad, but we want to understand so that we can act. And we want to see we want to, how do we get that understanding? Well, we use seerah. We use the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So one of the special things about this tafsir, at least what I've seen, I have limitations, but from what I've seen, is that he does that quite frequently. A lot of other tafsirs don't do that. Like, for instance, in Surah Al-Baqarah, he'll say that, he'll give, in the introduction, he'll talk about that this was in the time period when they migrated, when they made the hijrah. And then he'll say, well, this was in the early phase of Medina, or this was in the, mid phase of Medina. And then in this phase of Medina, these things were happening, right? And these ayat at this time came, after some time, because now the Quran is focusing on reconstructing the family. That's the example I always use. So he it's like being there. Are you going to say something?
Now, his approach is kind of an exception. He's the only one who's taking this approach, or there are other ulamas, or there are other tafasir, which...
Not like this. Not like this. Maybe in Urdu, that's why I said according to my limited knowledge. But what I've seen in Arabic, and I've seen quite a few tafsirs, not at this level of showing you the dynamic interrelationship between Sirah and the Quran.
And the first 8 or 7, what are the top tafsirs, like Ibn Kathir and all the others, like at that level.
But Ibn Kathir focuses a lot more on a hadith. So Ibn Kathir, and also Ibn Kathir is not going to... Ibn Kathir uses what is called the atomistic approach. He's going ayat by ayat. He's not looking at the big picture. So for instance, when we start looking like this, if we're coming to the Quran, immediately we come to the surah, and then we start talking about one ayat at a time. Do we get a big picture immediately? Or we're going from ayat to ayat, and then we have to draw the big picture. Which one? Which one is it?
Can you repeat that?
If we open up the Quran, and then we see a surah, whatever surah it is, Surah Al-Alaq, whatever, and then immediately we go into the ayat. Maybe we say Mekki Medini, but immediately we go into the ayat. And then we just study one ayah at a time. Are we getting a big picture?
You say that without the background.
Yeah, without the back, yes. And so he realized there was a gap in most of us, that we have to have that background. Especially when you start talking about professionals, they invest a lot of time in studying other sciences. And even for people that study Islam, even for people that are so-called experts in Islam, the same thing. A lot of times they miss the big picture. Even from this angle, like the scholars of Islam, they were serious from the angle of every detail of the Quran they looked at. 77,497 words in the Quran. So from there also you look at frequency rates. How many times does it say Rabb? How many times does it say Deen? How many times does it say Ihsan in its different forms? And then you get an understanding. Like the word Zulm in the Quran is a little above 200, I think, something like that. And so you get, okay, this Quran, there's something to that. Why this is not coming up 10 times or 5 times. It's coming up a good portion of times. Word Salah is coming up so many times. So it gives you an idea. It gives you like a map. You can kind of see what the Quran is focusing on. So, but yeah, and this is the point that I was making. Very few books of tafsir do that. They relate the two. Another thing that it does is it expands our understanding of what we call asbab al-nuzul, or when the Quran was revealed. Sometimes asbab al-nuzul, if you look at, like for instance, asbab al-nuzul by Imam al-Wahidi, it's just a couple ahadith that says, well, this ayat was revealed at this time, and that's it. And it gives you So and so narrated that the ayat was revealed on this occasion. This is deeper because it's giving you not just the so-called reason, but it's giving you the context. And he does that a lot. And he even teaches you how to frame the ayat in light of what? In light of the context itself. He teaches you how to frame the ayat because he says, look at the meaning. He says, look at the meaning. The meaning here is not really possible that it could be in this stage, right? Not possible that it could be in this stage. So sometimes, you know, in the things, the fiqh issues in the tafhim, we could debate upon that. You know, the time bound issues, things that relate to culture, we could debate about that. But the most important thing, at least what I see, is to understand that structure. To read it, to understand that structure. And so one of the things, like for instance, when we talk about studying from the big picture view of the Quran, the point of the idea of studying it is it gives us kind of a grasp. When we look at the context of the surah, right, that for each surah there's going to be a theme which unites all the ayat together, right? So a surah is made up of ayat. So what will happen is that even within the groupings, we can group the ayat and we can kind of say, okay, these three ayat, they relate to each other. There's a theme that's there. Okay, another three ayat, they relate to each other. There's a theme that's there. So you get a few themes. And then when you sit and you focus, you realize, well, there's a main theme that connects all of these ayat. This is simple, very simple in the case of Surah Al-Ikhlas. What's the main theme? Yeah. But when if I were to say that to you, what's the main theme of Surah Al-Baqarah? It takes more reflection. And that was important. Why? Because the non-Muslims, they tried to put doubt in the Quran in this regard. They tried to say, well, the Quran is not logical. It doesn't go from introduction to the body conclusion. Because that's their concept of logic. Right? Whereas when you see when the bigger surah of the Quran, when the themes become more diverse, it's showing us that all of life is interrelated to each other. It's impossible. Like, is this the only moment that exists in time that we're living in? Or were there other things that happened before? There's interconnection between different things. So, even that indicates to the issue of Tawheed, that life is interconnected on all kinds of levels. You with me or no? And so, for instance, the ayat groupings, that's what you see as a theme. Then we come up here. So one surah in the Quran will be positioned next to another surah, next to another surah. So like we mentioned before, each surah has ayat. So for each ayat, there'll be themes. So then we get a main theme. And then from another surah, we get a main theme. And then from another surah, we get a main theme. And then within that, we have lessons. But then these scholars discovered something. When you begin to look at this theme in relation to this theme, just like we did with the ayat, we put them in groups. The same thing, when we put surah into groups, we get a main meaning. And we see that, for instance, like Surah Al-Fatiha, it will tell us in Surah Al-Fatiha is isolated. That's what the meaning of surah means, is bracketed off. These group of ayat are bracketed off. The ayat are like signs of Allah. Right? And so Surah Al-Fatiha, Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim. Right? So you see that there's asking for guidance. It's telling us there's such a thing as guidance. Okay, you put that to the side. As soon as Surah Al-Baqarah begins, Hudan lil Muttaqin, is that guidance that you were asking for from over here. So it's beginning with this book is describing it. So then from there we realize that there's something called munasabat. There's a relationship between a nisbah. I think in Urdu, do you have the term nisbah? Yeah. So you have a relationship between these two. So sometimes there may be the end ayat with the beginning ayat, but there's a relationship to show that the Quran is what? Integrated. Right? To show that it's integrated. And so then, this is kind of where thematic tafsir is at. The Tafhim as a whole is not going to take that kind of concept. But if you look at the introduction to the Tafhim, which we call the 4 concepts, what Maulana Maududi did is he took the word din or ilah or whatever, but this as an example. So what he did was that he took all of the ayat from different surah of the Quran, not in one place, right? And what? And he took all the ayat with this word or some sort of relationship, has it here, and then he examined them, and then from there you get the mafhum, right? The understanding of what deen is. Huh? Okay, we said that this is like really what we mean by thematic tafsir, right? So all of the tafhim is not using that method. It's not using that method. But the introduction does. Just like we said that, for instance, when it came to the issue of the application of surah of the seerah to the Quran, there's like a technique in there, a methodology that you can learn. Don't get stuck on facts. That's what I'm saying. Look at technique. So the technique shapes your thinking. You go into the Tafhim, you see, he gives you, like for instance, he organizes for you. He's organizing for you. He's kind of giving you the structure as soon as you go in. He's giving you a structure of how to study the surah. Don't just say, okay, well, the name of the surah is this, and it's Surah Iqra, and it was Mekki, and it talks a little bit about Jahiliyyah, and these are the lessons. No, take the framework, and then you apply to any surah. So when you study the Quran, immediately, let me reflect on the name. Let me reflect on when it was revealed. Let me think about the background. Then what are the lessons? Right? So he gives you that framework. So then here, another thing that he does, another framework concept that he gives us is he makes us think about the seerah in relationship to the Quran. Right? So one of the things that we looked at, because we're trying to say that there's a structure to the Quran and studying. There's this idea amongst the scholars, it's called thematic tafsir. And it's very good for us because it's not just studying one ayah at a time. It's teaching us to look at kind of a big picture. It's not the only way to study the Quran, but it simplifies it for us. It makes it enjoyable too. And then from there, one of the ones that was doing a lot of this was Nu'man Ali Khan. He was simplifying this for the Isra Ahmed as well, from the older generation, was doing that. There was a lot of people that were doing this type of study. So we said that, okay, if we were to break out the framework in the thematic tafsir of the Quran, they're not only looking at the groupings of ayat, the themes in one surah, but they're looking at the main theme that we can get from the surah. And then they don't stop at that. They're looking at a group of surahs. They put a group of surahs together. They see what is the relationship between them. Right? And then can they get like a supreme theme from all of these, right? So we said that all of the tafhim is not like that. That's not the method. But the 4 concepts, we get in the 4 concepts a taste of it, which is the introduction, the muqaddimah. And he teaches us a methodology for how to study the Quran. And today's time is easy. Why? Because you have these types of things. You have things like Corpus Quran is a website. Corpus Quran, you go, you punch in a word in English. It has the root words in the Arabic here. And if you kind of know how to maneuver between the two, either way, if you use the English or if you use the Arabic, it'll bring up all the ayat with the word deen. He did this prior to the computers. And so, for instance, the word deen now is not just, let's look at the word deen, like the word Islam. Let's not look at just the word Islam, submission. Let's look at the word Islam of how it's used in the Quran in different ways, in different forms, in different ayat. Right? Different, yes. And now you get a more rich understanding. Right? So that's the overall framework. So then as far as the surah that we're studying, when we start talking about the backdrop to help us with the with the background. One of the things that happens first is that what? You have Muhammad bin Abdullah, which is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's supposed to be Abdullah, but I put Abdullah. So one of the things that I was noticing that comes up is parallel, is you have the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and society. You have the Prophet Muhammad, now he became the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's in the cave of Hira, and then now he's thinking about Jahiliyyah in the cave of Hira. We talked about that. The response of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, he's concerned with his people and so on and so forth. And we got that from Sirah. And we said that specifically in Rahiq al-Makhtoum, he emphasizes that. That's not emphasized by everyone. But in the biography of Rahiq al-Makhtoum, that's why we should never, ever, ever think, I read this, I know. Right? Sometimes that becomes intellectual egoism, where we think we grasp the idea with our mind. I understand. Sometimes that's the danger of this method, because it simplifies it. I understand. That's why some scholars are opposed to this. They say don't put your framework on the Quran, because the Quran is an ocean without a bottom. You know, you can keep studying and studying and refreshing and studying. And Imam Said Nursi, he says that in every age, the Quran will refresh in itself and present itself in a different way. This type of approach to the Quran came at a time period where the university education all over the Muslim world was creating doubts amongst the Muslims. And it was creating a mindset amongst the Muslims that Western education is superior to anything that Islam has. And the extreme of that was that Islam is outdated. So this type of approach to the Quran is speaking to that type of mentality, right? That type of mentality that has studied science and engineering and so on and so forth, classification. And it's not that the scholars didn't understand that before, it's that it just became something that became popular as an approach because it became a good tool in education. So the backdrop of Surah Al-Alaq, which we're still studying, or Surah Al-Iqra, is that first we see the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam before prophethood, and he's in a society that has a lot of issues. Then we see him become a prophet. The surah begins to be revealed in the context of him reflecting upon Jahiliyyah. And so then in the second part of the surah, 6 through 19, we begin to see the prophetic model, right? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is now in that process of teaching the Quran and so on and so forth, and we see the opposition, which is Abu Jahl. And we talked a little bit about the story of Abu Jahl. Abu Jahl, he was vested in his people, and he was by no means ignorant as far as thinking and so on and so forth. He was ignorant from the angle of opposing the deen, but he was a very intellectual person, right? And also we can talk about revelation and reason, how sometimes people can go off the deep end in their thinking. So what we see from here is kind of like the making of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what we see from here is that, okay, initially there's this problem of society and so on and so forth. It still continues. And this can continue to the day of Yawm al-Qiyamah. Opposition to the deen. Issues that come up with practicing the deen. The issue of Jahiliyyah doesn't necessarily go away 100%. It's a process. What was the way that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how did he teach the deen? Did he force people to change? By his action, and what else? Was it just look at me only by his action? Or was he involved? How? Teaching? Yeah, he taught. He cultivated the people. He was there and involved with them. Was he a micromanager? He controlled every facet of what people did. No, you see sometimes the Sahaba, they have ideas and he let them have that environment. We have that issue with our children. I know it's hard because it's easier for me to say, look, shut up, listen, be quiet, do what I said and that's it, but that's not going to, it's not going to build a mature person. It's just not, then what happens if I die? How do they grow? How do they know how to do anything? Some things they may get on their own, but that doesn't build them up. And so that was the issue with Abu Jahl. They saw the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Abu Jahl and company, which was the elite of the society. They saw him as bringing something new, which was going against the ancestors. It was going against the elders. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was like, you know me, like, you know who I am. I'm with you here. He's like, I'm not. And then there was proof of that later on. Don't tempt me with marrying your daughters. Don't tempt me with the wealth. I don't want the position. I don't want to be the head of the tribe. I want a qualitative change in this. Because everything that this represents is against the human being. And it's deep because this surah, it begins with a discussion on the human being, the first 5 ayat or so. And then it's like you see that basically it's tied into this issue of Abu Jahl opposing the Prophet. Even opposing him, with the issue of questioning, does he make sujood? To the people around, gathering intelligence about him. Yes, he does. Well, I'll go and put my foot on his neck. So there's an opposition towards the whole issue of even redefining the human being. Because once you redefine the human being, this changes. Okay, I saw something that was very interesting recently. It was about Malcolm X. He was asked about like transformation and so on and so forth. And one of the things he says, he was told, he was asked about the process of transformation. It's about awakening people. So then the person that was interviewing, awakening them to their exploitation. He said, no, awakening them to their humanity and to their heritage. And so for us, this is a major issue here. Because this was about heritage too. We're not only just talking about, okay, my fathers did great things and our mothers were like this. We're also talking about human beings. Human beings. Noam Chomsky did a lecture recently, an interview, and he was talking about the concept of the nation state as a political organization. Nation state, like a government formed on nationalism. And one of the things that he said was that it was so destructive. Why? Because everyone, the issue of, it's one thing to have an identity, is another thing when I create a whole political system only on my identity as opposed to your identity. And then he talked about the issue of how borders came in. And like some people, a border that's not even natural will come in. You have a community that lives right here. Boom, they put the border in and it separates the people out. Where usually there was no issue. So that's, even with this, we begin to see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He didn't teach us to destroy our culture or our people, but he taught us don't go to an extreme with that you want to fight and defend that identity to the point where what? You destroy other people. So here, awakening ourselves is to our humanity and to, our relationships with each other. Allah is the one that created us with diversity, right? So we respect that diversity. So here, there's some terminology that's very interesting. The word iqra. We said that it's not just only the reading of Revelation, right? And we said also that the word Rabb is the tying in of our Aqidah to believing that Allah created the world but maintains the world. And there's like some sort of like a tenderness there in the relationship. There's no way, if you're like a farmer or whatever, like a shepherd, farmer or shepherd. Can you be aggressive and violent with the plants, with the, or with the animals? Do you think you will be able to have crops if that's the type of approach you have? Or do you have to really put in the effort of taking care of the crops, or, taking care of the animals? You have to. So the word Rabb, is about us allowing, that growth to take place. And we mentioned that, for instance, when we talk about Iqra, it's about reading Revelation and the creation. These are the two books. This one is from Allah. The Quran is revealed, and this one is from Allah. The world and everything in it is created.
How connecting these? Okay, the revelation is the word of Allah, and then the creation. Are you saying that He created this world and humanity, and now He's giving us the revelation that this is like his way of taking care of it, taking care of the world?
I'm connecting these two by saying that, for instance, when we go, I was going to do it with a little more detail when we go into the surah. But there's the concept that there's two books. One is the book of Revelation and one is the book of creation. Both of them need to be read. We're part of creation. If we don't understand, there's a lot of things, like for instance, you're wearing glasses right now. If we didn't study ourselves, nature, we have lights on it. If we didn't study the world, is it possible to understand how to function in it at a higher level? We can live in it, but, at a higher level. Human beings necessitate that. You see what I'm saying? It's one thing that you read the creation, like for instance, an orange. An orange is an interesting example, because you can look at an orange from the side of, it's a beautiful orange. It's not a beautiful orange. Some oranges, you go to the supermarket, you're like, no, I'm not going to get that one. And then you look at the other ones and you're like, whoa, yeah, this one looks like it could be tasty. So that's just from the idea of the aesthetics, the beauty side. Then there's the side of, I'm going to eat this orange, right? And so when you open it up, now there's another reality to that, right? And so then there's the side, oh, does this go good with salad, or do I eat it by myself? That type of thing of getting to, is it really sweet, not too sweet? Is it sour? Then there's the scientific side of looking at it. We talked about the beauty side, and we talked about the usage side. And then we know that it has benefit, but we may not go deep and understand the chemical compounds and, and everything. So that's the scientific side. And then there's the political, economic side, where these oranges, how were they grown? Were they grown on stolen land? Were they grown with chemicals that are harmful to the body? Were they grown with labor that is exploited? How were they, so there's, just by the orange itself, there's layers of knowledge, right? So, we add on to all of that. We say, is rizq from Allah. Does that mean that we take away the other dimensions of understanding it? Today's time, they have all these different dimensions of understanding, like I mentioned, but they take away the side of, is rizq from Allah. They see what I'm saying? So the same thing with the creation in general. We use revelation to understand the creation, just like we understood the orange, but at the end of the day, we say, is rizq from Allah. That doesn't mean we ignored everything else that happened, right? Whether it's a political understanding, a scientific understanding, or the basic understanding of, I just want a nice orange, or the aesthetic understanding like the artist. So creation right now, this is where a lot of issues, a lot of confusion is at. So we use revelation. Okay, let's be open here. Why do we have an open problem with homosexuality? Why? In today's time, why? We're dealing with human beings. They're part of the creation. But why do we have a problem with it? just because it's not popular in our culture? Because in some cultures it's okay. Why?
Then that's according to Revelation, that practice of homosexuality is not the norm.
Yeah, because we come in with revelation to understand the creation. Right? We come in with revelation to understand the creation. There's a lot of examples like that. So if there's not a balance between these two, we also have to understand Revelation teaches us, you have to work with people and try to guide them. You can't just X them out. You have to work with people and try to guide them. Like the prophets came and they tried to guide people. So when these two are not together, we get all kind of chaos. That's just like the cases of people. They say we believe in revelation, we believe in Allah, and then someone is dying and they need medicine. What do? Just go pray, go make ruqya. No, it's beyond the issue of ruqya. We prayed. We understand that ruqya is part of it. This person needs medical attention. That's not a violation of faith. Allah Ta'ala gave us the means. He taught if we understand on this level, we'll be able to operate, in the right way. But we can't. It's not just the issue of understanding on that level without understanding revelation. Revelation is the key to properly understanding the world. So when we look at these two, like the concept of creation, we understand Rabb and creation to go together. That it's not just that this world exists without Rabb. This world exists, is maintained, is guided by Allah Ta'ala. But not everything that human beings do is justified by religion. We can't sit there and justify people, and I always say this, we can't sit there and constantly justify oppression on the earth of people and poverty and everything. We say it's just the qadr of Allah. Because Revelation tells us to be people of justice. Revelation tells us to stand for justice. Revelation tells us to give zakat. Revelation tells us that there's contracts that we should deal with each other. Or else we just blame Allah for everything. Sure, Allah created everything, but Allah's not pleased with everything. Our human actions have to come back to being guided by revelation. So that's why these two terms are extremely important in our understanding. Are extremely important. Is Iqra is not just what's the beginning of Surah Al-Alaq? What's the beginning of Surah Al-Alaq? Hufad. What's the beginning of Surah Al-Alaq? Yeah. So meaning what? No, that Iqra, what comes after? The name of Rabb, your Rabb. Right? The one who created. بِالَّذِي خَلَقَ. Right? So, the first thing we're introduced to is read. But then we're told read in the name of our Rabb. Right? And then we're told who our Rabb is the one who created, is in charge of this. Right? And then we're told about ourselves, about the alaq.
So the revelation is always going to be above of everything. That gives us.
Or the revelation and the creation go together.
Right. It's not a micromanagement, just like you mentioned earlier. That, okay, if you are sick, and you may not find all the cures in the revelation. We have to use our own.
You brought up an extremely important point. For human beings, there's a part of our existence which is micromanaged. Do you tell your body, do I tell my body to grow old or not to grow old? Can I stop my body and say, no, don't grow old or don't die? That's built into the system. It's built for him, for her, for everybody. It's part of the system and it's a pattern. We know as human beings, there's something we call human beings by definition, and then we know they have a beginning and they have an end in this world. Revelation teaches us that their end is the beginning in another world. We wouldn't know that without revelation, because we may think like the Buddhists. We may say, well, that human being is like the plant that's perennial. It goes into the ground and it comes back again. May come, but they say it comes back in any other form, right? Like the Hindus and the Buddhists or whatever. But for us, we say no. The human being has a bracketed out time. We get that from revelation. So the point being is that there's this dynamic relationship between revelation and the creation, that it always must exist. Our lives is the same thing. Deen can't just be in the masjid only. If we spend 24 hours in the masjid here every day, can the world function? Let's be realistic with that. Can the world function? Nothing will take place in the world. So there's a balance between these two. The dunya is not evil. It's that the dunya is limited. If we talk about the dunya in that way like evil, is because we're talking about the value of the akhirah over the dunya, that the akhirah outweighs, but it's not that it's evil. We're not Christians. And those ideas that come in sometimes into the Sufi literature and stuff like that, that comes in sometimes from their own, how they relate to the world, but that's not the Quranic understanding. That in their sense of mujahidat an-nafs, when they're struggling with their nafs, to discipline their nafs so that they can go to a higher level in their relationship to Allah and obedience, they may come up with that strategy, but that's not aqidah. Because the creation of Allah is good. And we know also Allah created evil. Allah created evil. That's the teaching that actually, one of the teachings that brought me into Islam. Because I remember when I was a Christian and we used to read the Psalms. I was studying to be a priest, and we had a book like this, and we used to read it on a daily basis, the Psalms. And I came to one verse which talked about that Allah created evil. And but how they were teaching, the philosophy of the Iranians, the Zoroastrians. So it made it seem like there's two gods, the God of evil and the God of good, and they fight each other. So I said, how could this be? So I never forget, I went to talk to a Muslim brother, African-American police officer brother. He was at a bookstore, and the owner of the bookstore and I brought that question up. And it became a dialogue. Said, no, Allah created evil. So Allah is in charge, but Allah is not pleased with evil. Like you said, the micromanaging side, the biology and all that, but the moral side of right and wrong, no, Allah doesn't micromanage that side, because there's the issue of reward and punishment. But everything is created by Allah, no doubt. That's the most complicated issue of qadr. Because Allah created everything, Allah knows everything. So then the issue, but in this realm, there's no micromanaging, because there's the issue of reward and punishment. Revelation makes it like a paradox. And that's why we said, be careful. Sure, everything, Allah is not pleased with evil, so we have to be careful. When we attribute, for instance, like a political regime comes in and wipes out a whole community. Qadr of Allah. So we know that Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala allows everything to happen, right? But Allah is not pleased with that. Or else we can create a crisis. It's better to say that, yeah, mashallah. Right? Right? But when we bring down that to the issue, we eliminate the human responsibility. If we eliminate the human responsibility, then why do we have Quran? For reward and punishment. You see the subtle point? Sure, everything is from Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. But when it comes to human beings doing harm to other human beings, we have to hold them accountable for the fact that they did that harm. Allah is not pleased with that. It's better to say that. Allah is not pleased with it. We know that Allah created everything, that there's nothing can exist without the permission of Allah. But when we start to get into that type of aqidah, deep down inside, on a personal level, we're seeing this more amongst the Muslims. In the past, we didn't see it. Before these, Muslims say, alhamdulillah, ala kulli hal, the concept of alhamdulillah in every situation, bitter, sweet, good, bad, whatever it is, alhamdulillah. That was the Muslim. But, now we're in a situation where it's like, why is it happening to me? Then not only that, why did Allah do it to me? Now has become like that. So when we have to be careful that when we start talking about what happens in the creation, that we don't attribute evil to Allah. Allah created it, but that evil from human beings are responsible for it before Allah. They're responsible for it before Allah. In other words, Allah created the choices, good and bad. They're all there. But who did it? Okay, when it comes to this, you're responsible as a human being. Now there's another level to that. Can Allah bring goodness out of that? No doubt. Could there be a wisdom? No doubt. Right? It's not just the end of the story. We see that in the story of Musa and Khidr, right? In the story of Musa and Khidr, we see a lot of tragedies. And Musa is even questioning Khidr about these tragedies. But at the end of the day, Allah shows that there's a higher wisdom, right, in life. What we see with the eye, we may not always understand. But as far as the law that judges us between human beings, right or wrong, I'm not interested in the wisdom of Allah at that level. Don't try to speak for the wisdom of Allah. Between us is the law of right and wrong. Justice, right and wrong, between us. Because when we start bringing in the wisdom side, then we start justifying anything. It's like, it's okay, No, it's not okay that somebody comes and robs another person. It's not okay that someone comes and kills another person. It's not okay that someone exploits another person. It's not okay that this person takes all the riches in the country and everybody else is poor. That's not okay. It's not okay that this factory comes and they use a chemical which causes cancer and they sold it to us and they never disclosed that reality. Now we use it in our food and now you have a whole population. That's not okay. We can't sit there and say, well, that's, within the qadr of Allah from the angle of it's okay for the human being to do that. If you're going to say, yeah, Allah created everything, no problem with that. But if you're going to eliminate human responsibility for wrong, when they did wrong, that's a problem. Or you're going to blame Allah for that, that's a problem. That's not a good understanding of qadr. The understanding of qadr is that Allah is the creator of everything. But we have to bring in the side of right or wrong, which that's what the Quran is for, to judge. This pleases Allah, this doesn't please Allah.
What about when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He's testing
That's true.
evil or...
But that's between us and Allah. If you come and you stab me and you say, well, this is the test of Allah, that doesn't work like that. That's between me and my relationship with Allah. For how am I going to understand the trials and the tribulations of dunya, right? But that's the danger of it. When we say just a test, this. But also that's why these things are paradoxes. But also Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala commanded us to enjoin the good and forbid the evil. So if we just leave it as it's a test, then what happens to the command of Allah, the other part of the message, in which Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala is enjoining us to command the good and forbid the evil? You see what I'm saying? So at the big picture, the meaning of life, everything is good. What happens? But at this level of law, of rule and order, you can't have a society with, what Allah is testing us. You can understand the meaning of life from that angle, but can you govern a society on that angle that Allah is testing us? I'm asking. You still need to have, see the beauty of the prophetic reality is that the Prophet ﷺ tried to teach us in such a way that we don't need to have police officers and people forcing you, because at the end of the day, ihsan, we ourselves self-control because of our relationship with Allah. And when it gets out of order, we have Islam. We have law and order, so to speak, to correct people that they deviate from the rights and the responsibilities, right? No? These are levels. These are levels. Iman is one level of understanding about the world, the nature of the world. But this pertains to our actions. With our actions, human action, that's the issue. We can't cancel out Islam. Human action is governed by a concept of right or wrong. The ultimate meaning, where that fits in the knowledge of Allah, that's in the knowledge of Allah. Allah tells us, yes, Allah, is a test of loving us, purifying us, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, that we can't say when people get murdered, oh, it's a test from Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, and just let it be. Society will never function like that. We can say to the people, people can, even saying to the people that, you know what I'm saying, is difficult. But, we can understand ourselves that, okay, it's a test from Allah. But we have to be careful telling people that sometimes. Because then they blame Allah. That's the issue that I want. This is a very subtle point. We do not want people having a bad relationship with Allah. This happened in Christianity and Judaism. Because they eliminated this, then it became like, well, it's God's fault. That's not our relationship with Allah. We have the concept of Rabb, that comes in. The concept of Rabb that comes in is Allah takes care of us. That's the default position. That our good opinion of Allah is that Allah takes care of us. There's situations in which our parents, they discipline us. And at the moment, it hurt. It hurts. You can't eliminate the fact that it may have hurt, even emotionally. Some of us in our relationships with our children, all we need to do is, and they feel it, and you accompany that with a word, and they feel it, and it's just like one of my daughters was like, they immediately start crying. I didn't hit her, but she felt the power of the word. She felt I was displeased with her. Right? But then the higher level is, okay, some need to be physically disciplined within means and boundaries. So then after, at that time, they look at that and they say, man, why my father or my mother do that? They're probably mad at the moment. And then later on in life, they turn around, they look at the benefit of it, right? They see the benefit. The point of that example is saying that there's things in life that we feel the pain. Like for instance, we go through the sorrow and the pain, and we go through the sorrow and the pain of divorce sometimes, or we go through the sorrow and the pain of losing a loved one. But when there's a good life that's lived, sometimes in these tragedies, you look back and you made it through and you're suffering, and you were like, wow, Allah was really, sometimes it feels like I want to go back into that moment. I was in a better situation with Allah when I was suffering than I am now. Sometimes it's like that in life. Everybody may not have that experience, but there's a reality to that. That some situations of hardship in the dunya, when you go through them and you look back in your life, you're like, wow, subhanallah. I was in a better situation in my iman, in my life, in my trust, in my everything. Right? That worked for some people. But some people are not like that. Some people are not going to draw meaning out of suffering. Some people immediately will just, go into kufr. That's the point that I'm making. We have to be careful. What you were bringing about the hikmah is drawing meaning out of our suffering, right? But when it comes to, right and wrong and making sure there's a boundary to people's oppression, we have to have some rules. I just want to, before shutting down, I want to make sure that we,
Sorry to step back into, the opposition.
Yeah.
We all know the opposition. That's evident. In the present day surrounding, you call like a movement within the Muslim community or Ummah to try to reform the Muslim, to please the non-Muslims or the present world as an opposition to the world.
I think that this reality here, I had a teacher, Qazbi Zalat. He's from the Scholars of Azhar. He's the older, I don't even know if he's alive right now. But because he was older when I studied a little bit with him. One of the things that he said, and he's like one of the top scholars in tafsir, Hafidhullah, one of the things that he said was that when it comes to the Quran, first thing we apply it to ourselves. Like, so for instance, here we have opposition, we have the prophetic model. Are we a Abu Jahl? Do we have qualities of the Jahiliyyah in ourselves? That's the first thing, is to look at the mirror. Where am I at? That doesn't mean that there's no opposition out there, right? But the point being is that any transformation, it has to be internal and external in a real sense. It can't just be that, oh, just go work on yourself. And it can't just be, well, just change the society. It has to be a combination of the both. But definitely, we have opposition internally and externally. And the internal is within ourselves and within the Muslim community. Yeah, we have both. And then, remember we talked about this before, that of the supporters of the deen was a non-Muslim. Abu Talib. Abu Talib, he supported the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam on multiple levels. And today we have the same reality. We have non-Muslims that they have affinity. They may not come into Islam, but sometimes they do more service to Islam than the Muslims themselves can, right? And they hold back the opposition from those who definitely don't want, definitely are at this level. That's a reality. That's from the hikmah of Allah. It doesn't make sense sometimes, but it doesn't make sense, at least at our level of human reasoning. Allah wa ta'ala can support the deen even with a person, rajulun fajr, that a person is a sinning person, or a person that can oppose the deen.
So you are saying that interfaith, interfaith with us is okay. Because
There's certain levels.
who are not changing themselves, but they are coming to our masajid and things like that, and somehow we are feeling that, say for example some law like they are violating those laws, but still they're coming to our masajid. So
Yeah, interfaith has its dimensions to it. There's some points of interfaith which are problematic, and there's some points of interfaith which are very necessary and beneficial. We can't live on a constant basis in a opposition to people that are in the community that we live in. They have to know us, we have to know them. We open up that door where anybody gets to label us as monsters as they will. That could be genocide for us. Not in maybe inshallah may Allah protect us in this country, but in other places as well. But then you go to the extreme where you don't keep your identity as a Muslim. Your identity meaning maintaining iman. It's not just like I'm Muslim, I eat zabiha, and then my life is not on point with Allah. Right? Not cultural Islam, but a real Islam, and it's not easy. That's why some people say, you guys over there, us over here. Why? It makes it easy. Because now I don't have to deal with your problems. Even some of the Jewish scholars have said that it's easier to just separate out. Because now you bring these problems to me. You bring drug problems to me. You bring homosexual problems to me. You bring doubts to me. You bring questioning my religion to me. You bring all kinds of issues to me now. That doesn't mean that the Muslims don't have it. But the Muslims, we have like a certain type of standard of, don't bring that to us. If you do it, you keep it in quiet. That's the standard that we have. Keep it quiet, right? Don't advertise your sins. That doesn't mean that we're not sinners, right? So that becomes the issue of the complexity of the human relationships, but we're forced into that whether we like it or not. And so the issue is that, like, we're living in these non-Muslim societies. I have a lot of qualms with the U.S. on a lot of different levels, but there's a lot of good in it as well. That doesn't eliminate any of the evil that's done, period, at all. But there's also good. And there's situations that the Muslims are in, like, that are super bad. Like, every other day when I read about what's going on, for instance, with India and in Kashmir and all that, it's just increasingly getting worse, right? And so you look at these situations, you're like, whew. And not only that, situations throughout the world. So it's not like we can just be like, them and us separate out. The world doesn't exist like that anymore. It's not that we can say, come on guys, let's go, let's build a new Medina. We're not even at the level of, let's go and let's do Pakistan. You know what I'm saying? That was an idea. It was an idea of, how do we deal with this, us and them? Well, let's go do Pakistan. And, even with that, there was opposition internally with the Muslims. But we don't, we're not at that type of world, in that type of world. Like, look at just what's happened in Bolivia. In Bolivia, you had Evo Morales. And people say, well, this is politics. No, this is life. This is life. You have indigenous leaders. That's their country. Not people that came through colonization. That generation comes from his people. They get into power. They make a better economic situation. And then the coup comes, boom. A week after they denied, contracts to lithium, people that wanted to mine lithium and all of that, and other issues. So the world is in shambles. That's the point that I'm saying. We can't afford to have that type, but we have to be, we have to have that prophetic model. We have to look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Even if we say in the time of Jahiliyyah, he had to engage life. He engages, and the thing about it is the opposition here. That came from his distant relatives. It comes from within the family. It comes from within the society. It's not always just Muslim, not Muslim. That's the complexity of it. Even the issue we talked about, the issue of hypocrisy, right? The issue of hypocrisy, even within that context, even within the Muslim community, we have that. That there's people that they act like they're really with us, but they're creating chaos amongst us because they really are not with Islam.
The question is, say, our relatives, some of our relatives are going the opposite way than
Right.
us understanding Islam. So, should we still be moving to them and telling them slowly by slowly the truth, or just go away?
That's a difficult thing because after Tawheed and Iman, the issue of the issue of maintaining our relationships is, if we break that, is a major sin. But sometimes the best thing, like you were saying, the Prophet led by example, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sometimes that love, let them feel you're the one. But the thing with that is that you're the one that you love. You have their interests in mind, but you can burn out. You have to take breaks. But they have to see Islam from you. If they're over there going back and forth in arguments and so on and so forth, and they're going, or they justified, leave me be. Life is, you live once and then you die. That type of thing. If they have some ideas in their mind about how to live life, sometimes that whole rational approach, I will tell you what Islam is. I'll tell you how you're wrong. They become the first people to say, you hypocrite, you do this and this and you're like, wow, you were watching me the whole time? And that's how it becomes like that. So to get out of all of that, just be a good Muslim, a good relative. What do you need? I love you, and let them know you have your boundaries, and that's it. And some people will automatically come. It's not. Lest alayhim bi musaytir. We don't have to obligate them. We ourselves, that's the issue that I was saying, indicating to, we ourselves are struggling internally just to maintain. And I don't think I could be wrong, I don't think we've ever had any period in Islamic history like this. Don't compare this to Mecca. Don't compare this to the time of the Tatar. I don't think we've ever seen any period on the face of the earth what we're seeing now in humanity. Ever, period. There's just no respect for anything except just getting stuff. There's no respect for human beings. There's no respect for anything. People say, oh, there's wars. No. It doesn't work like that. No. People had good natures. There's a level of confusion even about ourselves as human beings that has not been seen before. To the point where it's like, I can't even have a discussion with people on an individual level because there's no common ground. We've never seen that. That's what, by practical definition, that's insanity. Is only me and my own reality. That's insane. A person is just me, what I think and what I believe in. That's it. If you go and you read psychological definitions of insanity, that's what it. The person is just locked into their own world. I see pink elephants. There's no pink elephant there. Yeah, don't you see the pink elephant here? There's no wahi coming. This is not an issue of the unseen. Yeah, this is a pink elephant here. You can't convince them otherwise.
You're talking about not just a Muslim.
The world over. The world over. That's why from the Muslim community side, the best thing that we could do is be involved. Not everybody has to be involved, but build actual communities. Actual communities means older people, younger people, and children. It doesn't mean and men and women. It doesn't mean just men. It doesn't mean just older men. It doesn't mean just youth. You know, it means family. It means family, because if we don't have that concept, then you have older people, they're getting old, their children moving, my career, you know, I have to go do my thing. So those people stay by themselves alone, you know, and then they don't have anybody who's going to check up on them if they go to the hospital, this, that, you know, it becomes a massive disconnect. And then the experience of the older people is not there with the younger people. And then the same thing with the children. The children don't, that's we've never seen that before. We've never seen this level of splitting in families and so on and so forth. And it's not, even in Jahiliyyah, in the time of the Arabs, they still had the tribe. At the end of the day, you still had your tribe. They had their fitna, but here it's individuals. You know, everybody's individualistic. No, we have to have a reflection on Revelation, and we have to have a reflection on the Quran. Right? That's the reality. We're going to end this video here.